Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Voice of Authority webinar brought to you today by Morgan Sindall. My name is Toby Fox. I'm the Managing Director at 3Fox, the marketing agency for councils. And our job is to keep our network of local authorities and the development community of developers and investors and their influencers connected. During coronavirus, we're doing that through our digital channels. We have Sitematch 365, in which councils brief audiences of developers on opportunities for partnership and development, followed by one-to-one focused online meetings. And the next Sitematch 365 event marks the launch of Ealing Council's Inward Investment magazine and presents its development company, Broadway Living, next Thursday. Hope you tune in for that. Our second channel is this, the Voice of Authority, a platform for councils to discuss the challenges they face, the influences on their decision-making and issues of urgency. The Voice of Authority isn't my voice, it's not 3Fox's voice, it's the voice of the local authorities, it's your voice. And if you'd like to be heard on this platform, get in touch at toby@3fox.co.uk. Next week, we're going to hear some of those voices discussing the government's white paper on planning alongside Montague Evans. I beg your pardon, not next week, on Thursday, August the 27th. And I suspect that could be lively. But so will today's session, where the focus is on supporting business through recovery. We couldn't have timed this much better. Yesterday, we discovered that the UK is suffering the worst economic slump in Europe, that we're in the deepest recession since records began, that quarterly output has collapsed by 20%, and that the Bank of England expects recovery to slow dramatically after the third quarter, reflecting consumers' continued concerns about health risks and fears over job security. GDP will not regain its pre-crisis level until the end of 2021. The Bank of England tells us. But not in Hertfordshire. Well, look, we're not here to pretend that the going is going to be anything other than desperately tough, even in Hertfordshire. But we are here to look at a case study of how damage can be reduced, how circumstances can be improved, and how recovery can be supported. We're here to find out how collaboration between 10 district and borough councils, a county council, and a local economic partnership under the banner of Hertfordshire Growth Board can fast track a scaled rebound from the impact of COVID-19 and in the long term build on Hertfordshire's distinctive strengths to provide a clear route to success. And we couldn't ask for a better panel to do that with. Today, I'm delighted to be able to present to you in alphabetical order Sean Bradley, who is Managing Director of London and the Home Counties at Morgan Sindall.
Hello.
Councillor Maurice Bright, MBE, Leader at Hertsmere Borough Council.
Good morning.
Patsy Dell, Director of Hertfordshire Growth at Hertfordshire Growth Board.
Morning.
Neil Hayes, who's the CEO at Hertfordshire Local Enterprise Partnership.
Morning.
And Julie Newland, who is MBE, who is Pro-Vice Chancellor at the University of Hertfordshire. Good morning, Julie. 3 bits of housekeeping before we hand the session over to them. Firstly, viewers, let me remind you that in about half an hour, also, we'll be putting your questions to the panel, so please make use of the Q&A function on your screens to stimulate the conversation and encourage our panelists to share their experience and their insight with us. Secondly, a reminder that we're going to be loading some snap polls onto your screens during this session. Your responses to those are going to fuel our conversation as well and provide material for our report on the session. And finally, a small plug. Last month, the environmental charity Fields in Trust called on government to reassess how we value green space. The organisation said parks and green spaces play a vital role in people's health and well-being, and these benefits have been shown even more starkly during the really difficult times our country has faced in recent months. Our local parks and green spaces have been crucial during the crisis, and they will have a significant part to play in our recovery. Now, there's an innovative little company in our network called GLE, which can help local authorities improve and upgrade green spaces to boost leisure use at potentially zero cost. And we're going to be sending everyone watching this webinar a link to the 15-minute webinar after this session. I urge you to have a look at that. But now let's get to our panel. Perhaps we're going to find out what role green space can play in Hertfordshire's revival. But in the first instance, let's see if they can lift our spirits in these dark days with their insights into working together to support recovery. And I'm going to turn first with that aim to Neil Hayes. No pressure, Neil. CEO at the LEP, Hertfordshire LEP. Neil, local enterprise partnerships are leading on the economic recovery for their local areas. So what kind of framework does Hertfordshire need to reignite its economy?
Thanks, Toby. Well, I'll start with a negative and end with a positive, if that's okay. So partly what we're pulling together at the moment is an economic recovery plan. And that sort of sits squarely in the middle of the sort of framework of which the Growth Board is operating in. So part of that process involves getting an understanding of what's happening to the local economy, articulating how the LEP and other partners have responded, and sort of signposting where we need to go, at least in the short to medium term, and then with a wider Growth Board strategy, that longer term approach we need to take post recovery and continuation of the strong economy that we've always had in Hertfordshire. So if I was to start in terms of the beginning, Hertfordshire has suffered, as with everywhere else. We're expecting around a 5 billion hit on our economy this year. So Hertfordshire is around a 40 billion economy. Often that gets overlooked. I find that it's a very strong economy. In our LEP world, Hertfordshire is, what you could argue, is geographically one of the smaller LEPs, but economically one of the larger ones, actually. But we expect that to take a hit. We're estimating at the moment possibly around 60,000 jobs lost, and that's against a sort of working population of around 600 to 650,000. I have to say, those figures have been revised down recently, so we're actually more optimistic than where we were a while ago. And I think this also kind of alludes to the point that we're in a constant state of flux in the moment, and actually we need to kind of remember where our economic fundamentals are. So a lot of this information, and we almost get on a daily basis, don't we, in terms of facts and figures of where the economy is. We know that the economy is suffering. We know that, for example, there are around 37,000 people in Hertfordshire that are already on the claimant count, so on the unemployment list. And just for comparison, that was around 12,000 last year. So we're beginning to see the hit. We know there's about 163,000 people on furlough in the county. And obviously the acid test will be when that scheme winds down in October, how many of those people will potentially be unemployed. Likewise, there's around 53,000 people on the self-employment scheme just of support, which will also be wound down. So we're not out of the woods yet. And I think the other thing that is really important to factor is that this is having an impact on our localities in very different ways. So some parts of our economy are suffering more in terms of places. So, for example, the furlough rates in some of our boroughs in the county are higher than the UK average, significantly higher. So in Broxbourne, it's about 32% against the UK average of about 24%. In places like Watford, it's about 11%. So there's huge variance, which actually shows how multifaceted our economy is, which is complex in terms of determining a policy response, but actually that diversity is our strength. So if you look at what we have in terms of on the positive, we have a number of key sectors that have been sort of powering through the current crisis. So we've had advanced manufacturing sector still at full production as this is going on. Our life sciences sector, which is hugely strong in Hertfordshire, has been working with addressing the current challenges along with other areas of the country, but also powering through. We know that the creative sector has taken a dip, but it's quite quickly bouncing back now as the studios are open and production starts to sort of build again. But we also know that sectors such as retail that were, let's say, on the decline ahead of this current situation, what you're actually seeing happening is a kind of acceleration of decline over a really rapid period. So in terms of retail sector, what we're seeing is what I'd call structural decline, that we're not necessarily just going to get those jobs back in the county. So we need a plan for how do we find employment in some of those growing sectors for the people of Hertfordshire to move into. But we also have a very highly skilled workforce. We also have a significant amount of that workforce that would historically have commuted into London, not doing so at the moment. They're doing this kind of activity About a third of the Hertfordshire's workforce has historically commuted into London. There are huge opportunities for Hertfordshire going forward, I think, in that space in between. I don't think we're going to have a binary flip back to the old ways of working. I don't think we're going to continue what we currently have either. But what you might have is a more balanced approach. And I think places like Hertfordshire, with numbers of connected towns that have high-skilled individuals that maybe have that we're going into London once or twice a week, because naturally that will still be a pull and a requirement, that may be working from home, but maybe also working in some of our town centres and collaborating and meeting up with clients and teams across Hertfordshire. I think that's a huge opportunity for us to sort of look at going forward. And I think that's exactly an area where the LEP, working within the growth board, we can start seeing how this can help address one area of decline, which is retail, with one area of opportunity, which is employment space. So I think it's about looking at one issue and not necessarily thinking about looking in the rearview mirror for the solution that's required. It's actually, and I think that's where the strengths of the growth board are coming to the fore, where we different perspectives. So obviously we have a private sector led board and a private sector chair who have a perspective on life, and we're getting real anecdotal information from businesses about what's happening. And I think within all that space, there's an opportunity for innovation and ingenuity about, well, actually, why couldn't we do things differently? How can this be an opportunity to address long-term issues of, how we need to grow some of our sectors? So I think the recovery plan, which will be circulated next week, will give a kind of a view to how the LEP and other partners have addressed kind of the first stage of this response to recovery. So the first few months, the LEP has put a lot of money into sort of support schemes via the Growth Hub, which is delivered in partnership with the university. We've, I think, about nearly 500% increase of demands of, quite rightly, from businesses wanting advice about how do I get help. We've introduced a mentoring scheme. We've also secured about £18 million from government to invest in those areas where we think will create jobs in the future, including Elstree Studios, which Maurice will no doubt talk about later, but also in those sectors I talked about earlier in terms of environmental technologies, life sciences, etc. So it's the way I describe it is we have to deal with the here and now, but always have one eye for the future and how can we make things better over the longer term. And I think the recovery plan gives us a step forward. I think we need another pause, obviously, when national policy changes, such as the white paper, such as coronavirus job retention scheme, and we need to reflect on that. But it doesn't stop us having that long-term aspiration and that long-term ambition. And, I did chuck out some quite scary numbers, I know, at the beginning, but the fundamentals of our economy have been strong. And I think, compared to a lot of other areas, we will see a resilient Hertfordshire economy going forward.
Fantastic, Neil. Thank you for setting the scene so succinctly. Let's turn to Councillor Bright then. As you suggested, you mentioned Elstree. What are Hertsmere's plans for economic recovery, Councillor?
Well, I'd like to thank my warm-up man, Neil Hayes, first of all. Give the worst possible scenario and then hand over to me, because it can only get better from there. No, I think, in fairness to Neil, I think that all of us in local authorities, once we got over the shock of what effectively, when the pandemic hits and the shutdown, when all our attention had to be on making sure we could provide essential services to people and just keep the world spinning. Once we got through that stage, we had to get, if you like, ahead of the curve, knowing that there would eventually be a stage when we would come out of that, even though we were still in it. So our people were still suffering. We are part of those people, but we had to start considering further ahead. And there have been some very useful discussions taking place with groups and organisations like the LEP, etc. And as has been mentioned with the Hertfordshire Growth Board, this is two years of work that was done ahead of where we are now. All the districts and boroughs, along with county and the LEP, working together to see how we could move the Shire forward. That was before we had these issues. And if anything, we will be more resilient coming out of this as a consequence of the work that was done in advance, even though we didn't necessarily know the dangers that were ahead of us. So we come from this perhaps in a slightly stronger position than other areas might. And yes, there will be a white paper next month looking at ways that local government can perform better together and so on. And I think that we can already show that, thankfully, through the work that we've already done, we may be ahead of the curve on that in that particular area. As far as Hertfordshire is concerned, it's an interesting one. As Neil alluded to, we are very a typical commuter land in that a third of our workforce would be going into London every day. And one of the reasons why we had such high COVID rates, as you'll remember very early on, we had very high numbers of old age homes, higher than average elderly population in much of Hertfordshire, high BME community, second most diverse borough and district in Hertfordshire, but we also had a huge number of people that were commuting into London. And once that stopped, the numbers started to fall back, and thankfully they are well under control now. But there were people who are thinking, well, do I want to go back into London? But that's a discussion for I think later on. As far as Hertfordshire is concerned, we are very proud, if you like, of our creative industries history. About 10, 15, 20 years ago, creative industries, they weren't dirty words, but they weren't something that was given any credence or credibility. They just were what they were. I remember Ridley Scott, the film director, saying that in the 60s, all the money he was making for Shepperton was made because from the advertisements that they used to make, not films. But no one talked about adverts because it was common. You only talked about films. And I think the same was the creative industries here. Well, they were putting money into the economy and they're making films and they're putting stuff on television, light entertainment, but we really don't want to talk about them because they're not deemed as being very sort of highfalutin enough. That's now changed. Huge numbers of jobs, huge amounts of money, huge amount of training for the University of Hertfordshire, probably one of the top media training facilities in the country. And of course, now we have, the council owns Elstree Studios, and we have done for over 20 years. That's where they make The Crown, that's where they make Strictly. Those shows are now coming back. We didn't close during COVID. People could still come in, but production effectively stopped. And you're seeing now on television repeats of shows and, you know, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire episodes that we've all been seen before. And I still get the questions wrong. But the reality is production is one of those things that is very, very important because people at the end of the day, even if they're not going out to the cinema yet, will turn their television on. So production is needed. So we know that Leavesden is starting up with films again. Elstree is starting up with ours, with BBC, with the shows like Pointless and The Chase and so on. The Crown and Strictly is coming back in a slightly different form. But of course, while all this has been going on, BBC Elstree, which makes EastEnders and Holby City, has been completely rebuilding its EastEnders set. So it's set for the future, it's digital. And there was the huge news from Sky, Comcast, and NBC Universal that they're opening a £250 million production facility in Bournemouth, 12 new sound stages, 2,000 jobs to be delivered by 2022, and £5 billion of production investment in drama, etc., and so on. And that's all going to be happening up here within Hertfordshire. Jobs, money coming in for local economy, money coming into the local businesses and so on. And so we have this great, well, British Hollywood is back, where it used to be many years ago, Elstree and Bournemouth. But that doesn't just go to Elstree and Bournemouth, its spine goes through Hertfordshire, Potters Bar, Radlett and Bushy, training through the UTC, training the next generation through the University of Hertfordshire, because it's all very well saying build stages and they will come. The reason why the Americans like to come over here is because of our technology and of the way that we train people in special effects, for example, but they need to be trained. And then Hertfordshire and Hertfordshire will act as a spine as those talented people then go to the creative industries throughout the country. And Hertfordshire is delighted to be able to lead on that. And we see that that is already having an effect. So I see the future as being, well, I was going to say bright, but that sounds a bit tacky. But I see the future as being an opportunity. We've got through the shock of this all now. And what people and residents and businesses need to know is that we've got their back, and that whilst the numbers of those people losing jobs is high, there will be opportunities for some, and we will do our best to make sure that they're equally distributed and that we can train people into the next generation of work. So I think it's good news, and I'm very proud to lead an authority that's forward thinking, is entrepreneurial, as well as be chairman of a board of studios, which is producing some of the top entertainment in the country, which at this time is needed more than ever.
And what role, Councillor, do you feel that the Growth Board can play in supporting and working with Hertfordshire in that process?
Well, you've got to understand that it's very easy to say that you have a studios, but for Hertfordshire, having our own studios, we don't just benefit when people come into our studios and hire a stage, like they do at Leavesden or Pinewood, for example. If they're hiring a facility, fine, but they may want to be out on location. And Hertfordshire locations, across all the 10 districts and boroughs, for example, One of the reasons why we pushed through a private act of Parliament, Filming on the Highways Act 2014, to attract more people into Hertfordshire. But the economic spend each day, depending on where they are, is quite high. So if you're a television on location production, then you'll be spending £20,000 in local economies. If you're making a film in Hertfordshire on location, you'll be spending £40,000 a day. So Hertsmere may get the production offices and the costume. That's one bit of bubble. But the double bubble comes from all the money that's then spent in the local areas, whether that be Hertsmere or anywhere else in Hertfordshire. And Hertfordshire see that. So, and the LEP sees that by all working together across boundary, you know, we can say, well, you've got Hatfield House and you've got that way and you've got that way. We're happy to act, if you like, as a conduit to send productions out. And the Growth Board, if you like, is an umbrella organisation like the LEP that says, how can we add value to this, not just for Hertsmere and for your studios, but for our residents, our services, which don't have to be necessarily production services. It's all the ancillary industries that go with it, and all the catering and all the restaurants and the car parks and the accommodation that needs to go with it. So we have a close relationship with the Growth Board. All the districts and boroughs are very much on side. The LEP have been an absolute delight, and it does look very much like in a few weeks' time, fingers crossed, we will be in a position to take a project that would have cost the borough £12 million to build 2 new stages at the back of our site, which at the last minute we decided not to take to council in March, April, because we didn't want to take a risk with any reserves because we didn't know what was going to happen. The government has given money to the LEP and said, oh, okay, we might be happy to fund one of those stages for you, buy one, get one free. So that's development, that's good for people building, and it'll bring more jobs into the area, and they're not just in Hertsmere. So I think we are working together, and we can show very many examples to government, but also to our own people, of how the Hertfordshire Growth Board with the LEP can really lead the way and show a very entrepreneurial way of doing things in local government circles, which perhaps historically hasn't always had the best reputation, like any form of government, of moving quickly. We're showing that we have and that we can.
Fantastic, Councillor. Thank you very much. I knew I could rely on you. Having heard you speak before, I knew I could rely on you to give us some raise our spirits a little in these dark times. There's some good news in the murk and the gloom. Now, both Neil and Councillor Bright have mentioned skills numerous times, and the skills base in Hertfordshire is a significant strength that the county has in responding to the crisis. So, Julie, let's look at the university. What role is the University of Hertfordshire playing in these sort of revival prospects, if you like, in the processes and in the rebound from the crisis?
Yes, good morning, and thank you for inviting me. Well, I think the university plays a role, a vital role, but in 3 key areas. The first one clearly is skills, working closely with industry, with our colleges, to ensure that we are producing really highly skilled workforce, and that is a relevant workforce and in the areas that are needed. And so that's one of the major areas of clearly that we contribute. But I think we also contribute in 2 other areas. One is around business support, business innovation, enterprise support. We are running a mentoring scheme with the Hertfordshire Growth Hub, and sponsored by the Hertfordshire LEP, where we're providing mentors to local businesses at the moment in this time of crisis. But we also have the university is open as an incubator, and has been for a couple of years, where we have a whole community of practice of people starting up businesses and using the university as the community base to do that. And that allows us to understand small business and bring in expertise as and when, driving entrepreneurial behaviours in our students. So I think there's skills, and then there is business support. From that kind of support through to expertise in marketing, strategy, raising finance, and the kind of business services you would expect. So we also contribute in that way. And then thirdly, and very importantly, we contribute in terms of innovation and research, because we are only going to get out of this by delivering tomorrow and inventing tomorrow, not simply efficiently delivering today. Whilst that's vital, absolutely vital, and our graduates have to be able to hit the ground running and go into businesses and deliver today. What we have to do is have a great research base where people are actually thinking about tomorrow and inventing tomorrow. And so our research, our innovation is also, I think, a very important pillar to both Hertfordshire and UK PLC, driving us out of the recession that we sadly find ourselves in.
Thanks, Julie. And can you identify some of the areas of those of that research? Just following up what you just said. What are the kind of key strengths? Where is the future?
Yes, well, certainly we're working very closely in the life sciences and working up with many of the large corporates in Stevenage. So our life sciences, our transport, our green technologies, we have a huge impact in that area. Smart buildings, smart technology. We work very much with BRE in using our, and also I think what's important is the integration and of research areas. So our computer scientists working with our engineers, working with our civil engineers, and so it's adding up to the greater than the sum of its parts, in that you bring highly skilled and experienced researchers from what might sound in an academic sense diverse areas, but and I think that the LEP and the LEP have very much been a driver of bringing us together in that sense. So working with Rothamsted Institute, working with BRE, working with the Royal Veterinary College, often these can sound like very disparate groups, but actually the strength is in working and solving societal problems and societal challenges by bringing that expertise together. So our computer science researchers are world leading, but they are very applied, and they're working and making a real difference to our smart building laboratories and working. So I think that's probably something that I think we don't always think of it in that way.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating, and I think some of that's going to play into our next session, our third session, when we talk about growth and development very specifically next month. You mentioned societal changes. How's the university see the lasting impacts of the pandemic on sort of skills training going forward?
Well, I mean, it's awful to talk about something like this and say I think they're going to be huge positives, but I think it's actually speeded up. It's really speeded up the direction of travel. I think that we've all had to move very speedily to digital delivery, and I think this was the direction of travel. That the speed has meant people like me, perhaps, who would get round this stuff if they possibly could, have been brought kicking and screaming. And so I think there are several things. I think the way that we deliver now, instead of us talking about online or face-to-face, digital delivery was actually becoming part of skills delivery and should be seen as a valid and a creative way of delivering learning, not as that you can't get to the real place, so you're going to stay at home and do it. And it was almost a second-class citizen way of providing the learning, whereas we all know that digital delivery can, for some things, be a better way of delivering learning, can be a better way of, if you have a room of 200 people, actually working in this environment, people are much freer to ask questions, to interact. It can work very well indeed than one lecturer standing in front of 200 people. So I think there's something about our skills, the integration of digital going forward, and then I think working digitally so that we graduate students who can truly work in a digital fashion and are used to doing their assignments and working with, we have students now who are working with students overseas on an assignment. I mean, we've always done it, and it has been possible for some time, but I think this has accelerated that, so that our students are becoming much more able to work globally, because if you're going to work in this way, it matters not. We have assignments where students from the University of Hertfordshire are working with one of our partner institutes in Kuala Lumpur, and they're doing a combined assignment. So I think that the way we teach and the flexibility, and I think flexibility is going to be vital for upskilling people. But I think it's going to be, it's culturally changed us from thinking that it's an alternative because I can't get to actually seeing it as a positive. And then, of course, there is something very rich about a campus experience and people actually getting into a room and working with each other. And so I think it was Neil that was saying, I don't think we will go back to a kind of polar opposite. We're not going to go back, but neither will we see this as the only way of working. There's going to be, I think, a very rich combination, and we're going to use all of the opportunities. And I think that's going to make for a much more creative and richer way of working. Yeah, and there are some real implications, as was raised earlier, around placemaking, around that. What's the future for towns on the outskirts of London? But that's brilliant. Julie, thank you very much. I can assure the audience that there was no kicking or screaming when you joined Zoom this morning. In fact, Julie, I don't mean to embarrass you, but you solved a technical problem yourself in making the connection work out. So that upskilling programme is clearly in force at the University of Hertfordshire. Patsy, the turning to the growth board, why is good growth curation at a local level so important for Hertfordshire's economic recovery? And can you talk a little bit around what is meant by good growth, following our conversation at a session last week?
Yeah, thanks Toby, and thanks for giving me a repeat opportunity to come back and talk about the growth board. So I'm very appreciative of that. I think that whole notion of curation of good growth, I couldn't draw on a better line really than stealing from Morris earlier. I think it's about that messaging to our residents, to business, to our anchor institutions in Hertfordshire and to government, that we've got your back on this. Probably what we're doing, I think, through the growth board and the work we're doing isn't rocket science, but I think the way that we're trying to put it together and work, coherently, really understanding our place, understanding the assets we have, really thinking about the impact, but keeping track of that as we go forward, because it is a changing picture, as Neil's described that. But then building on the work we've been doing from that understanding of our place and our assets, we've developed, a coherence of programmes that work across short, medium and long term for Hertfordshire. So growth locations, supporting our key sectors, think about town centre regeneration, accelerating housing. There's a real mixed portfolio of things we're trying to do here, which we feel are coherent. We've put a kind of COVID lens over them just to make sure that they work with where we are now, and they absolutely are the right set of things for us to be doing in Hertfordshire. We've also brought that political, business, civic leadership position together, which I think for people investing in Hertfordshire and wanting to know, how we're working, also speaks to the strength of how we're trying to respond and curate that good growth in Hertfordshire. So it's a mixture of things, but pulled together with coherence, I think, and incredibly important for places, I think, to understand that the institutions within it are looking out for their place and are working together well, collaboratively, to join up and get more than the sum of the parts in a response and in future. So, I think that's the basis of what we're trying to do here.
What can you say about the sort of short and medium term targets, Patsy? What are the specifics of what the growth board is targeting?
So, some of them are around kind of process, joining up, having clarity of ambition, working more systematically together. So, Neil's described a lot of what's happened in the short term to be looking at how we can support, for example, construction, continuing to deliver planning and other services, where we can apply flexibility to keep the construction sector moving. The LEP have led on a huge amount of local business support. We've spent a lot of time continuing with these longer term plans for the Growth Board, and the feedback we've had from government is that really speaks to our commitment to taking that longer term perspective to recovery. We're continuing to have conversations with government in the hope that we will end up with a growth and housing deal to support our delivery ambitions in Hertfordshire. We're focusing on 2 key growth corridors in the north and south of Hertfordshire, and a range of projects there that are supporting our strategic garden towns, garden communities developments there, but also moving forward with planning for the delivery of really key fundamental infrastructure like mass rapid transit systems, thinking about digital connectivity. And all of these things have a role to play in that changing, perhaps future world of working from home in Hertfordshire. We're trying to anticipate that and take the opportunities that arise out of the COVID situation, perhaps for maybe when things settle down a bit more, a world with better air quality, where people will want to work from home, but as Neil said, they might want to work in some of our high streets that might be repurposed to help, a 1 or 2 day a week working from a local employment hub. And that will help with regenerating some of our town centres that are in need of that, but also stimulating ones that are perhaps successful at the moment, but we don't want to see decline. So I think there are a range of programmes, the things we're working on that hit that short term, medium term and longer term in curating, a place-based response for Hertfordshire.
Fantastic, Patsy. Thanks very much for that. We've got some great questions coming in from the audience. We will get to those in a few minutes' time. We've also got a raised hand from a participant, and regular viewers will know that I'm very sorry, but Alexander Wright, this is for you. I'm very autocratic about these sessions, and we don't allow anyone other than the panel to take the stage, as it were, today. But we are tackling questions. We do welcome your questions. If you just put them through the Q&A channel for us, then I'll put them to the panel in a couple of minutes. But before we do that, let's turn to the private sector. Sean at Morgan Sindall, how's the company sort of adapting to operate in the current phase of coronavirus?
So thanks, Toby. So Patsy made a very clear phrase there about keeping the construction sector moving forward, and that's obviously been hugely important to us. So we're nestled away in Welwyn Garden City, in amongst Tesco's. We're a private sector company, but we have a very clear purpose. We're here to create places where people live and learn and work, play, care and protect. And circa 70 to 80% of our work is indeed in the public sector. So we're a private sector company firmly embedded in the challenges of the public sector. So I think that a phrase that we use a lot, maybe too often, is collaboration. And I think over the last 4 to 5 months, in conjunction with our customers, our supply chain and all the other stakeholders, we've genuinely collaborated. You now know what collaboration really feels like. And it's been tough. There's no two ways about it. But I think that common goal approach of getting ourselves through has been a real positive over the last 4 to 5 months. One of those challenges has been around health and safety. So obviously operating through the pandemic has not been without its huge challenges, but in many ways, as a business, we were well set up to weather the storm. As a sector, we are regulated in terms of health and safety, and the key priority of the management is around that regulation and monitoring. So we use to change, we adapt well, and throughout the whole process, all of our sites have remained fully operational, safe, and following, and in many cases exceeding the best practice, the industry guidelines. But I am not going to pretend those first few weeks when Boris said stay at home, but construction, please don't stay at home, please go to work, they were difficult, and weeks we will never forget. So So one of our key customers in Hertfordshire is St Albans, and we're working on Seacoast South development in the city centre. And it's a really good example of where we've worked really closely with the district council and the officers just to keep things going and keep things going safely. And as well as building stuff, we've worked on many initiatives with the district council, one being Construct a Career programme, which is big focus on the unemployed wanting to work in construction. And we've successfully taken on a couple of people and they're working out well. So on a macro level, obviously the coronavirus job retention scheme has been significant and really valuable for the sector. In the short term, it certainly helped us out, but recently we've made the decision to return all of the money received by the scheme, that's circa £9.3 million, back to the public sector. And why have we done that? So we entered COVID in a strong financial position as a business. We've been resilient throughout it all, and it's been deemed by the board to be appropriate to repay it back to the taxpayer. So that decision has been made recently. But the coronavirus scheme certainly helped us in terms of cash flow. I think it's often said in construction, cash flow being the lifeblood of the industry, it's never been more pertinent than at the moment. So back to that collaboration, we've been working with our customers and our supply chain and suppliers just to keep the money flowing through some pretty remarkable times, to be fair.
Absolutely, Sean. Absolutely, and you know, it speaks volumes for you as a business that the gesture of returning that money once the cash flow issues have been overcome through the government's intervention. So well done for that. As an investor in Hertfordshire, out of all the things you've heard today, what are the sort of 2 or 3 things that most interest or pique your attention or excite you?
So I think the University of Hertfordshire is really important. So it's really important, as Julie said, in terms of providing the skilled workforce. But there's also the other aspect of actually capital works that are being undertaken at the University of Hertfordshire. It's an environment that we really enjoy working in. I think we've done circa 10 jobs in the last 15 years, and ourselves, local SMEs, other local contractors, that physical activity of doing work to generate those learning environments, that would be really good for all parties. I think I'm really interested in that conversation about people not commuting into London. And the opportunities that arise there. I think everybody's grappling with that at the moment, but I think working with all the participants on this call and the wider Hertfordshire to benefit, I think public and private sector working together on that, I think would be astounding. And also, you know, we have a joint venture between Morgan Sendall Investments Limited and Hertfordshire County Council, which is accessed by all the district councils, called Chalkdean, which is, in our opinion, a really good example of the public and private sector working together to generate positive outcomes, which is what's been talked about on this. So I think they're the 3 things that come about, and just I listened to the last webinar and the enthusiasm and the energy that's been put in to keep Hertfordshire going. It's good. It's really good to hear.
And so you've talked about you're in a new phase in terms of the pandemic. You're starting to look forward rather than worrying about the current time. And you're clearly a committed investor to Hertfordshire. So just briefly, if you would, in your view, what role can the Growth Board play in improving those relationships, in helping you do business, in helping you improve the economy locally?
So I've mentioned the Chalkdean development, so I think that's one way that we could work together. But obviously, public sector frameworks, we can all work together. They are very effective platforms to generate growth, and they are a way of collaborating, generating value for money, and getting agile access to local tier one contractors like us, and also local SMEs. And I think I also picked up on, I think a key component of the Growth Board is obtaining money from, and I can never get the phrase right, the MHCLG, and we are having various conversations with the MHCLG, and I think just obtaining those funds to benefit us all. I think we could work together with the Growth Board.
Great stuff. Thanks.
Just one final thing, if I can say. I think we talk about economics and things. I think one thing we've been talking about a lot recently is we've all had electric shock sent through our bodies for the last 4 to 5 months, and there's obviously the economic, and it's good to be involved with all that. I think we've all just got to look at everyone's well-being as well, and we've been having a conversation recently as a business about checking everyone's all right, checking people are taking their leave, because we joked about it earlier on that leave's not like it used to be anymore, and when you're on leave, being on leave, because this thing's not going away. So we probably just need to look after ourselves all throughout the process.
Yeah, absolutely. That well-being piece is a thread that runs strongly through all of these conversations, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Right. Let's get to the exciting part of the morning. We've got the Q&A from the audience. We've got some fantastic questions lined up. I've been monitoring them as we've been going. A number of them fall into the same category, and it's the big one. I guess it's mostly for Sean and Patsy and Councillor Bright to address. But Danny Kay is the winner. He's got the most voted for question. How would you all like to see Hertfordshire respond to the government's Building Beautiful, Building Better Commission report? What needs to happen to ensure this agenda is delivered successfully? We've got 2 whole sessions on this coming up, so we don't expect you to cover all the ground. But Patsy, would you like to have the first go at that?
I'd love to have the first go at that. So, I mean, Hertfordshire is a beautiful place. It's got a fantastic quality of life. It's the home of the very first new town. So it's always been a place where, planning and planned responses to growth pressures and challenges have been part of our history. So, we want to protect what's fantastic about Hertfordshire. Its character, that juxtaposition of urban, rural, its polycentric character. So I think we welcome anything that's going to underscore quality placemaking now and in future in Hertfordshire. And, I think if that actually comes through strongly in the government's reform, it will be a successful outcome of changing the planning system. But I think we have to wait to see that, that promise will be delivered on. But it's certainly high up there. Quality, good growth, they're things that we really care about. And we're doing what we can locally to make sure those are the outcomes of all our work.
Are you broadly supportive of the direction of travel?
What, in the white paper? Ooh, that's a tough question. I don't think anyone who's worked for over 3 decades in the planning system and lived through as many changes as I have would have any argument about the need for reform. I think there does need to be a real understanding of, implementation at a time when we've got significant change happening. But I won't be sad to see changes to the local plan system. I'd like to see how the zoning principles are going to work and how we're going in local authorities to have sufficient resources to do justice by all this, because it will need careful curation to make sure we get those quality outcomes. But, I'm not against fundamental reform personally. I think it just needs to be done in the right way.
Fantastic, Patsy. Councillor Bright, if you'd like to pick up on that, and also a question on a much more sort of micro level from an anonymous attendee, which is normally very ominous, but not in this case.
That'll be my ex-wife probably.
So what she wants to know is how the studios are going to thrive and work with continued social distancing for the foreseeable future. How will productions be able to be made? So if you'd like to sort of pick up on building better, building beautiful, as well as that, please do.
I'll do the building very quickly because I'm sure there are other people who are more qualified than myself. But the reality is, I'm not a great liker or fan of the word reform. I tend to like the word evolve because reform tends to imply that all that's been or what's been in the past may not have been right, and it might well have been right for its time and for its generation, for its history. But things need to evolve. We're showing today how the economies need to evolve into a different way moving forward. And I think that anything that helps the song that Hertfordshire can sing by us working together to evolve a system which allows people want to invest more and come here more is great. 5th largest contributor to the UK economy, and we need to stay that way. in film and television world, 40% of the country's location filming is done in Hertfordshire, so we want people back. And we want people like Morgan Sindall investing in the area, because it's quite obvious that not as many people are going to want to go back into the cities like London to work. It's going to be done differently. So let's make building, planning, housing, offices, let's make it all that much more beautiful if we can, to attract people and hold on to people. And we need the transport infrastructure to go with it. All very well putting the buildings up, but if you can't get from east to west, they'll just circumnavigate us. But that's my plea for infrastructure. In relation to studios and productions and social, and thank you very much, Danny Kay, for that question. In relation to the anonymous question, it's a very, very interesting one, isn't it? Strictly Come Dancing is about to start again. And they're going to do what other shows are doing, and that's they're going to ask the dancers to socially distance themselves, like the footballers have been doing for a certain number of weeks. Number of shows is being condensed. That means from that 14 to 10, that means the number of people they need on set is condensed from the number of dancers and so on. And that means that they can socially distance more. The advantage of Elstree Studios, unlike other studios, they're made really for film as well as high-end television. So where they film Strictly is actually in a film studio. It's huge, one of the highest in Europe, so there's plenty of space. But you can do your light entertainment shows, a lot of quiz shows like Who Wants to Be a Millionaire that used to be at Elstree. They were fairly far apart anyway from a meter point of view. I suppose it comes down to drama and maybe the soap operas, which are dust down the road. I haven't watched EastEnders for a while. I don't know if they have as many punch-ups as they used to, but certainly drama such as The Crown and so on, film, if it means that we focus more on the quality of drama, people speaking, rather than rushing around duffing each other up, then I think that's probably a good thing. The reality is that the industry is focused on social distancing. We don't let anyone into the studios unless they've had their temperatures tested. They have to wear a mask in open spaces. The BBC, who are based at ours, and others have to have their own rules in place to ensure that people who come in haven't got it. And we now are having testing done as well at the studios. So it might well be that in order to get your favourite dramas back on the screen, the stars are going to have to socially distance as well. The reality is there's a lot of work out there for actors and people in the industry at the moment, because there's not huge amounts of production going on, and I'm sure they'll all be prepared to do. But one thing we do know, as I've said to you before, that hopefully we go back to the cinema, but one thing we do at the end of the day is we switch on the television. It is a voracious beast that needs feeding, and the industry is adapting its methods to allow for our favourite shows to be made in order to keep the industry going, keep the jobs in the industry, and keep the people happy.
Absolutely. I must say, you mentioned drama. A lot of the drama presumably goes out of Strictly, certainly in the drama in the sense of marital relationships with social distancing. So we'll see how that plays out in the Daily Mail over the coming months.
Well, I can tell you privately, because I know there's only a couple of hundred of us here. I went to finally see it about 3 years ago, and after the show, I was invited to go. After the show, my wife kissed Brian Connolly. Brian Connolly kissed her, right? It was a show, and we're getting divorced now, not me and Brian Connolly. So I don't know if it's the curse of Strictly or not, and it's Brian Connolly or me, but you've got to watch it up there. You've got to watch it. Okay. Wear masks at all times.
Brian is no longer welcome in
my house.
Hertsmere. Neil, feel free to pick up on either of those strands. So the government white paper and the effect of social distancing on the way businesses are evolving. But also there's quite a technical question here from Duncan Bell that is actually worth answering in terms of making things clearer for the audience, for investors and developers in particular, from my point of view. In terms of aims and objectives, what is the fundamental difference between a growth board and a LEP?
I think the LEP, I would describe it, it's a component part of the growth board. It has very much a focus around delivering the skills agenda, business support, encouraging enterprise, encouraging innovation. We do, via some of the routes we have of funding, invest in kind of infrastructure areas. So there are areas of kind of, not overlap, I would say sort of synergy, but the growth board essentially, I would describe it as a kind of having a broader oversight than the LEP in terms of the panoply of things that affect a local economy. We have a sort of fundamental role around productivity, I would call it. So the things that ultimately affect the economy. But those longer term issues like infrastructure, like housing, the ability to have that kind of long-term view is not necessarily within the LEP's kind of remit. So we're very much more focused on the kind of the here and now interventions. But clearly, being economically driven and doing a lot of work in terms of evidence, we have a view and via our kind of business influence, we want to have a debate over the type of issues that we want to reflect it. So I don't have a strong view on the planning white paper, but a good example coming into this crisis was the impact of policies such as permitted development rights and how that impacted on, in Hertfordshire, huge loss of employment land, to the point where it was getting quite a critical issue. And again, from looking at it in the broad space, of course, we do need more homes of the right type and right scale, but we also need jobs to go with them. So I would say, we have a distinct role within the partnership, but where the Growth Board adds value, it can amplify all of these messages up. And if, as a place that we can have unity of voice, that is what government listens to. We all have our roots individually, and the universities, local authorities, we all have our own sort of roots and voices into government. But if we can do that collectively, all from the same hymn sheet, and this is borne out in other areas that have some of those kind of sort of structures going forward, that is what government turns around and listens to. So we'll be sort of working within the Growth Board, championing the issues that mean something to us, and we were delivering stuff. A huge element of what we do is supporting the Growth Board, but we're not going to achieve all that we want to achieve unless we're more joined up, and that's where we see the value.
Fantastic, thanks Neil. And you might want to comment on this before I move this on to Julie as well. There's an interesting question from Chantel Lommel, or Lommel, I hope I got that right, Chantel. Digital learning may be a better way, but what about all the families who don't have digital skills and or the technology at home to be able to engage with digital learning? Too many families don't have those facilities. What can the Growth Board, the LEP, the university do to support those families? Neil, do you want to pick up on that first?
Yeah. I think it's a very pertinent question. What we don't want is a digital divide, and also building on Tim's point around supporting people in declining parts of the economy. This isn't just about making the better places even better at the expense of places that are suffering. What we need to do is have a better balance of encouraging the areas of growth which the private sector wants to invest with a supply of people in the locality that can provide that local growth, that we're not importing people into Hertfordshire to provide jobs that actually local people could do. Now, where there's a mismatch, that is where the LEP and other partners can work with, as Julie mentioned, University, FE. We can try and secure funding, try and do on a local level a better job of matching local skills needs that meet local demands. So we're not having this disjointed effect that, we talked about commuting into London. We also import people into Hertfordshire to do jobs in places like Stevenage, etc., and St Albans. I think, the current climate actually makes us question some of that now. So we can be more sustainable in terms of that ability to grow, have more of our local talent pools meeting that local need. I think the challenges are when, particularly with skills, a lot of the kind of the policy drivers and the funding are set at national level. So it's actually difficult to pull a lever and actually get some funding and say, right, we know that there's X number of engineers required to support this sector. Here's a bit of funding. We know there's an aggregate sort of number of people, young people in this area that would want to do that. Away you go. It's getting better, but we're not quite there yet. So that the system doesn't quite work for us at this point in time. But part of the working with the Growth Board is asking for some of those those levers. It's actually saying, can we have the right to self-determine some of these things rather than having to sort of make the case to government for every single initiative?
Yeah, it sounds so simple when you put it like that, Neil. It sounds so simple. Julie, would you like to add anything to that outlook?
Yes, I mean, I think firstly I would say I don't think digital is better. I think it's a very rich and creative additional way to manage our learning experience, and I think it's also the way that people are going to work additionally. So therefore, it's so vital. So, I think what is better is to have a really rich mix. I think in terms of people that don't have access, I think our 4 colleges, we cover the entire county with FE colleges, and I think our educational and skills outreach in that sense is very good in this county, because we do have those 4 excellent colleges. I also think that we're all working in the apprenticeship scheme. So the colleges have lower level apprenticeships, we have the higher level apprenticeships. So I think the answer, or in some way to those fears, are through the colleges, as well as the funding that we can all collectively go for through the LEP and so on and so forth. So of course there's funding, there's outreach funding, there's widening participation funding, and we use that to provide support for equipment, if you like. But I think the colleges play a very rich and important role, and also our responsibility is working together so that people can start at whatever level and know that they have a journey that they can follow within the counties, and we're very good at that in the county. So you can start at levels 2 and 3 in the colleges and know that there is an exit route, if you so wish, right the way up to postgraduate and PhD level. And that again is that cooperation and collaboration between us all is vital. And I think that perhaps we don't make enough of that already existing.
More to do. Sean, I wanted to come to you and ask you about your involvement in apprenticeships. You've mentioned that already, and I know you've got a very full program there, but we're out of time. It seems from this side of the screen that an hour slips by in a flash, because there's so much ground being covered and so much insight being shared. I hope that's a view that's shared by the audience as well. It's been an absorbing discussion, a wide-ranging and lots of insight. Thank you so much. I hope everyone's been able to take something useful from today. Thank you to our panel, especially for being so lively and engaging and sharing your knowledge with us. Please assume with some confidence, I think, that our audience is applauding wildly over their keyboards. To thank you, Sean Bradley, Managing Director at London and Home Counties at Morgan Sindall, Councillor Maurice Bright, MBE, Leader at Hertfordshire Borough Council, Patsy Dell, Director of Hertfordshire Growth at the Hertfordshire Growth Board, Neil Hayes, who's the CEO at Hertfordshire Local Enterprise Partnership, and Julie Newham, MBE, Pro Vice Chancellor at the University of Hertfordshire. Thank you all. And thank you to our audience, to you, our viewers, for your attention, your stimulating questions. We've got 10 of them left we haven't answered. We'll put those to our panel by email afterwards and get as many of those answered by email, and we'll circulate their responses on social media channels. Thank you, of course, to our sponsors, Morgan Sindall, who've made all of this possible. We're going to be back with Morgan Sindall and the Hertfordshire Growth Board again on the 10th of September with the final session in this series, which is asking, what's the role of the Growth Board in supporting development and delivery during Hertfordshire's long-term recovery? Meanwhile, don't forget, next Thursday, we're back to meet Ealing Council and its development company, Broadway Living. You can book yourself into that session, all of these sessions, and watch the videos of our sessions via 3fox.co.uk or the voiceofauthority.co.uk. Until next time, from our panel, from me, and from everyone at 3Fox, goodbye.